We are at Yellowstone National Park, staying at Fishing Bridge RV Park. This is Fishing Bridge, where there is no fishing, but the trout spawn here in June and July. Looks like we missed it. This is the Yellowstone River. There's a nice view from the bridge, and the water's very clear, and during June and July you can watch the spawning activity. We entered Yellowstone from the south gate coming from the Grand Tetons going to Fishing Bridge. Fishing Bridge is the only campground in the park to have full hookups. All other campgrounds are dry camping. Each little area tends to have its own amenities such as a store, lodging, campground, visitor center, and restaurants. But everything is pretty far away from each other. From Fishing Bridge to Old Faithful, it was an hour drive. From Fishing Bridge to Canyon Village and Norris Basin, it was 45 minutes. From Fishing Bridge to Mammoth Springs was an hour and a half, but we were able to complete the upper loop. This is the lower loop. We never went to Lamar Valley, which is where you can find wolves and bears, and we exited through the west gate, but we didn't stop at any of these basins. We arrived about 3 in the afternoon and headed for Mud Volcano, where we took this 0.8-mile boardwalk around the loop. This is Dragon's Cauldron with Sour Lake in the background. Churning cauldron at Mud Volcano. On our way to Lake Butte, we came upon this elk that was near a turnout and surrounded by people that were way too close. The rangers came along and shot it with paintballs until it crossed the river. This is Lake Butte, where some grizzlies were spotted earlier in the day, but we didn't see any. You can see all the devastation from a past fire. In 1988, 1/3 of the park burned. Day 2, we headed for Canyon Village, the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone, and passed some bison along the way. At the canyon, we saw Upper Falls and Lower Falls, from the north side, from the south side, from many different vantage points, including the 600-foot drop to the top of Lower Falls. From here, we headed to Norris Geyser Basin, where there was 2.5 miles of boardwalks to view. The parking area was very busy here, but with our small car and enough people leaving, we were able to get a space. It's important to stay on the boardwalks when walking in the thermal areas, as over 20 people have died falling into the pools since Yellowstone's inception. Some dogs have also died as well. Steamboat Geyser is the world's tallest active geyser, but it's not predictable. Our way to Old Faithful the next day, we passed some elk and crossed the Continental Divide, where rain and water on the west go to the Pacific and on the east to the Atlantic. We spent the day at Old Faithful, where there are 3 miles of boardwalks to see many geysers. We missed Old Faithful by 5 minutes and had to wait 90 minutes for the next eruption. Our favorite geyser was Riverside, which erupts for 20 minutes. It was predicted to go off at 11:05, but didn't go off until 11:40, so we had quite a wait in the hot sun. Thermophiles are heat-loving bacteria and archaea that live in these pools. These microbes create the many colors you see in the pools, as different ones live at different temperatures and have different colors. After our hike around the geysers, we went to Old Faithful Inn for a buffet lunch that was adequate and a tour that was very interesting. The inn is a National Historic Landmark built in 1903 and 1904 out of lodgepole pine from the surrounding area. In 1959, there was an earthquake that measured 7.3 on the Richter scale. It caused the chimney of the kitchen to collapse, but the main chimney, although it turned, held strong and remains today. Today we're up early in search of wildlife and heading towards Lake Butte. On the way, we came across these elk near the Pelican Creek Trail, and we went down the trail to see them. Here they are getting ready to cross the trail in front of us at a safe distance. This was our most exciting wildlife encounter. In 1872, Yellowstone became the world's first national park. It wasn't always as beautiful as it is today. Early tourists threw lots of things into the geysers, clogging them up. They also vandalized them with writing and names and dates, as well as taking little pieces home. Thankfully, the National Park Service was developed, and now the park is well protected. We headed to Lake Butte, where we didn't see any wildlife, but we did pass this bald eagle in a tree. At 9 o'clock, I took a ranger-led hike on Storm Point Trail. I took lots of video of the marmots on this hillside, which basically look like a New Hampshire woodchuck. One couple that passed our hiking group said that bear crossed the trail in front of them. This is the area next to Storm Point where you can see the erosion. That little peninsula at the end there is Storm Point, and this is Yellowstone Lake, where the temperature is only 45 degrees, so there's not really any swimming in the lake. The Absaroka mountain range is in the background. That afternoon we headed for West Thumb Geyser Basin. At this point we'd seen a lot of thermal features, but this one was nice because it was along Yellowstone Lake, providing great views. The story of Fishing Cone is that at one time people used to fish off the cone, catch their fish, and then dip it into the cone to cook it. There is a half-mile outer boardwalk and a quarter-mile inner boardwalk to view all the features. Right now, Blackpool is a beautiful blue, but up until 1991, it appeared black because it was a little bit cooler and microbes could grow. According to the rangers, Abyss Pool's been running a little bit strangely lately. It's much hotter than it has been, it's overflowing, bubbling more. They suspect it might erupt soon. After our walk around West Thumb, we went over to see what was at Grant Village and found 2 restaurants. One was right on the water. We were hoping to go in and have a drink, but both the restaurants didn't open until 5. The next morning we headed towards Lake Butte again in search of wildlife. We're lucky to come across these 2 trumpeter swans. Trumpeter swans were nearly extinct in the United States by 1930 due to habitat loss and hunting. There were 70 swans left in the Yellowstone ecosystem, and the management of these helped lead to the trumpeter swan recovery. That afternoon, we headed over to Lake Village for the historic Yellowstone Hotel tour. When we first pulled in, I thought this was the front of the building, and I thought there were some architectural mistakes, but soon discovered that this was the front of the building, which seemed much more likely. 8 of these restored yellow buses from the 1920s are still used for tours today. This is a view from the Lake Yellowstone Lounge while we were waiting for our tour. The Lake Yellowstone Hotel was built in 1891, and the iconic columns we see on the front were part of the 1903 renovation. They were delivered by stagecoach from Mammoth Springs. This fireplace and fountain were part of the 22-23 renovation. This is a painting by Albert Bierstadt. Our tour guide told us that the yellow of the hotel is not named for Yellowstone, but it was the color of the Northern Pacific Railroad, and they had a big interest in the hotel and therefore painted it yellow. The next morning we headed for Mammoth Springs. It was a very foggy morning. As the fog cleared, we passed some elk. There were a couple of overlooks to see waterfalls along the way. And this petrified tree. We arrived at Mammoth Springs and had breakfast at the Mammoth dining room. Al had the buffet, which wasn't bad, and I was surprised to see they had a vegan option on the menu. It was a home fry stir fry. But unfortunately, it had tater tots for home fries, and they forgot to put on the chimichurri sauce. The U.S. Army managed Yellowstone until the Park Service was developed in 1916. We toured their compound. You can't go in any of the buildings except for the visitor center, but it was interesting to see. There wasn't a lot of parking over on the hot spring side, but we did find a space and took a nice walk, less than a half mile, around the hot springs. Many of the terraces were dry, but this running terrace was very pretty. Mammoth Spring is the only long stop in the upper loop, so the loop can be covered in a day. Everything else is quick stops, like this rock drive-through. And this waterfall is another new one. This kiosk is a historic place. It's one of the first exhibits by the National Park Service. It is for Obsidian Cliff across the way. Obsidian is a black, shiny volcanic rock. Most of Yellowstone is made of volcanic rock, as all the thermal features come from magma under the ground. We passed this resting buffalo, and then these standing crane. We'd seen these before, but their picture had been elusive. Our last pull-off was Roaring Mountain, which doesn't roar anymore. You used to be able to hear it from 3 miles away as steam escaped. As we neared the end of our drive, we ran into our first bison traffic jam, as many bison were trying to cross the road. 2 people have died from bison since the park's inception in 1872, but a number are injured each year. You're supposed to stay at least 25 yards away when possible. Yellowstone is the only place to continuously have had wild bison. By 1889, there were only about 1,000 bison left, and most of those were in private herds. Yellowstone had a wild population of about 25 that became protected, from which today's bison developed. Here's some important bathroom etiquette I learned while I was at Yellowstone. I highly recommend picking up these little trail guides and this experience planner, as they were very helpful. You can pick them up at the trailheads or the visitor centers. If you pick them up in advance, it's better. Just leaving Yellowstone National Park. That's it for this post. See you next time.